Welcome to the Born Wild podcast. This space is for birth workers, parents, and families. Anyone drawn to a more honest, intuitive way of living, birthing, and growing. Here we have real conversations, learn through reflection and community, and make room to explore without judgment. Because at the end of the day, we are all born wild. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Born Wild podcast. I'm your host, Sophia Henderson, and today I'm interviewing Jacob. Will you please introduce yourself to the listeners?
Yeah, of course. My name is Jacob Dubois. I am Christian, husband to my wife, Madison, and father of two little boys, 2 years old and 5 months. And I wrote a book about birth.
Which is, I feel like, a little unusual for a man. Why did you write a book about birth?
Yeah, so it was through this transformation of really just knowledge and learning about birth that I just felt compelled to talk more about it. My wife came to me when we first found out that she had gotten pregnant, and she was like, I don't want to give birth in a hospital. And I was like, that's a crazy thing to say. It didn't make any sense to me at all. I just thought hospitals are safe. Insurance covers hospitals. That's just what you do. Maybe there's a few people out there that do home birthing. That's cool for them, maybe a cool story, but that's definitely not for us. We're not doing that. It's not safe, and so it's not going to happen. That was my initial thought. I didn't quite say that exactly, but that was what I was thinking. And she didn't really push my buttons or anything like that, and she helped me just put resources in front of me, and I was going to some of the OB appointments with her and whatnot, and I just kind of got a bad taste in my mouth. The doctor was like a really nice guy, but it just seemed like we were just a number in and out the door, just going through the drive-through. And these OB appointments were like 5 minutes long. And so I started just doing some more research with my wife, Madison. We watched The Business of Being Born, and that was like the first domino for me. And I was like, I just need to figure out what the story is here. I needed to prove some of these ideas wrong, right? I kind of went into my research and learning process about birth as a skeptic, looking for really good reasons why my wife should just go to the hospital. And the exact opposite happened. And I ended up just doing a full 180 and becoming just the biggest advocate for home birth and midwifery care in general. And the reason I wrote the book was because I spent a lot of hours like reading, listening to podcasts. Dr. Stuart Fishbein and midwife Bliss Young, they were a huge influence on my learning journey. Michelle Adat, French obstetrician, and then just like a whole bunch of like random podcasts and birth stories. And me and my wife would be in the car and we would just throw on a birth story of some random podcasts. There's so many amazing ones out there, just like yours. And that's what we listened to when we were driving. My timeline might be a little bit out of order, but anyways, at around 30 weeks, we were like, okay, we need to go find some midwives. I was like, yes, let's do it. We were living in California at the time, went out to the Monterey Birth and Wellness Center, sat down with the midwives there. They're all amazing. And I had gotten to the point where I was comfortable learning from, like, going to the birth center at that point. And then from there, like, those relationships and those conversations that we had with them, that's what really made me trust this process and being different. And the reason why I wrote the book was because there was nobody that I could really relate to as just like a normal dad talking about this stuff. I didn't see anybody talking about it. So I was like, okay, I'm just a normal dad, right? Like, I'm not a birth worker. Before this podcast, like, I hadn't thought about birth much until the last podcast, if I'm being honest. I'm just a normal guy, right? And so I was like, I need to put all of the things that I learned into a very digestible book that convinced me that home birth is like the best thing in the world, in order to help really more women out there that want to have home births, who have skeptical partners and husbands, which I think is it's natural to be skeptical. I think that's a very natural reaction. I think it would be maybe a little bit weird if you just blindly were like, sure, let's do it, like, without asking any questions at all. Unless maybe, of course, you have a family member or something like that, then it was maybe less foreign. But yeah, that's the long answer to why did I write a book about it? It's because I just wanted to really distill down everything that I had learned into something that was really digestible, easy to read, like under an hour and a half. And it was the story that convinced me to be very supportive and enthusiastic about home birth, like coming from a place of confidence versus being scared of it.
Yeah. It's so needed because a lot of times if there are books specifically for the dad, they're already on board and it's like how to show up for your partner or just like support through birth, but not specific about home birth. And it's a really common thing we hear from women that they had to get their partner on board and it took some time to get their partner on board. Or if there is any hesitation, it's from the dad. And it's usually a safety piece, a financial piece.
Mm.
Who's up the mess after is our house just going to be tore apart? Yeah, so there's the things that are really common things that we hear from dads, and there is no place or there wasn't any place to really direct them. Yeah. So thank you for writing it.
Yeah, it was one of those things that I didn't, it wasn't on my life bingo card to write a book or write a book about birth. I really just felt compelled time after time. Just, I think we've done a really sad and tragic thing to birth as a culture over the past 100 years or so. And still to this day, I'm not going out to grocery stores and interviewing women about their birth story, but it just comes up in conversations. My wife will talk to somebody at the park, right? And I just hear it second person over and over again through the conversations that my wife has of just, there's millions of women who have traumatic birth experiences in America and other countries. And it seems to be something that if you're not a birth worker, not that many people are talking about it. And I just think that as dads, as husbands, this is something that we should care about.
Yeah. It's great too because you were saying, I'm just a normal guy. And originally you were saying, we're not those people.
Yeah.
Sure, some people do it. And I hear that from dads that when they do start talking about it, they're like, I had no idea that so and so had a home birth. And I golf with them. They're just like me. They feel, oh, that's for hippies or like those way far out there people. And they probably don't realize that there are a lot of people who have had home births that they know, but people aren't talking about it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. Will you speak a little bit to your experiences, your birth?
Yeah, of course. With our first, we went to the actual birth center and, oh man, my wife was 41 weeks and 6 days pregnant. And in California, they have a state law that basically makes midwifery care illegal as soon as you hit the 42-week mark. They can no longer be your provider. And we were just doing a lot of praying. And I think anybody who's gone to the 42-week mark, whether it's you or your partner, it is a kind of a stressful season in a moment that you want to do everything to make it not a stressful time because you're just like, when is it going to happen? Waking up every day being like, maybe today. And especially with the 42-week deadline for California, it made it a little bit more stressful, which obviously you don't want in order to kick off labor. But we ended up opting for AROM at 41 and 6. And for any dads maybe listening, artificial rupture of membranes, breaking of the bag of waters. And the midwives, they sat us down and they talked to us for a really long time. So this was not a last minute decision. I don't remember the exact numbers, but I think my wife, Madison, she was like over 6 centimeters and she was like 70% effaced. And she was like walking around almost in active labor. For a good almost 48 hours, she was just like, I'm good. Yeah, some prodromal labor and some contractions for sure. But she was just walking around ready to go.
Yeah.
And they were like, listen, you're so close. This is the only thing that we can possibly offer you. And these are the risks. These are the benefits, right? And that was, looking back, it was like, you will never get that level of just care and attention from an obstetrician. It's just not built into their practice and their schedule. We were at the birth center for probably 4 hours. 2 hours of that was like conversations with the midwives. They gave us time to talk about it, pray about it. We went outside in the parking lot. We were praying about it. We were like, should we opt for this or not opt for this? And we ended up opting for it. And she went into labor maybe 10 minutes after they broke her water. And then it was a hard labor. They call it labor for a reason, right? And it was a hard one. I want to say she was pushing for about 3.5 to 4 hours. And he kind of got stuck a little bit and we were moving around a bunch and whatnot. And eventually he was born at the birth center. My wife looked at one of our midwives, Heather, and was like, she got to a point of just defeat because pushing for that long and he was in the same spot for a while. And she kind of looked at Heather. She was like, what are we going to do? And Heather was like, honey, you're either going to have this baby here or we're going to have to go somewhere else. And then 3 minutes later, he was born. She just heard the somewhere else, and it was just like, absolutely not.
Oh, there's two options and I don't want
Yeah,
that one.
exactly. And it was legit. It was labor, that's for sure. And she had broken all of the blood vessels in her eyes. It was like she had just gotten done with the most intense workout you could probably do. But she is she's a powerful, strong woman, and it was beautiful. We sat there afterwards, and she had all of the endorphins and the hormones running. She was like cracking jokes just in birthland, and it was beautiful. Yeah. A few hours later, they were like, okay, you're good. Looked at each other and we were like, what?
This home with a baby?
Yeah. I think every parent has that moment with your first where it's like, oh my gosh, we came here 2 and now there's 3. And like, so yeah, that was our first. I just can't stress enough how valuable working with midwives was for our first specifically.
Huh?
And I think so much of the fear around birth, it comes from just as a society, we don't talk about it. And women are not taught these things about their body and about birth. And never mind guys. A lot of women don't know a lot of just common things about birth. And so there's just a lot of fear. And one of the ways to overcome that fear is just through learning and education, right? And so midwives, I always tell people, it's like they are some of the best resources in that learning process for the woman specifically, like learning to trust birth, learning to trust her body, like that, like having a midwife as that resource is invaluable. Yeah.
Did you have any, after you did all your research, decided on the birth center, did you have any fears going into that birth?
That's a really good question. If I'm answering honestly, probably still, but I think it was more of the unknown just because no matter how much of the research I did, I had still never witnessed a birth of any
Yeah.
mammal in my entire life.
Mm.
And so it was very foreign to me, regardless of the research and stuff and the conversations. I still had no idea what to expect. So yeah, there was definitely some fear there still.
And I
Um,
think it's important for families to know that they don't have to be fearless. Do
yeah.
this. You still have fears and your body will have your baby anyways.
Yeah. The more I think about it right now, like on the spot, as you asked me that question, is like less with our second, but
Mm.
still like I think you'd be crazy not to have a little bit because of the gravity of the situation. Like you're welcoming in new life. Like it is a very precious, vulnerable moment. And no matter what, it's unfortunate, but we can't eliminate all risk for
Mm.
birth or anything we do in life. And when people talk about like the power and the autonomy that comes from birthing at home, I think it's because you bear that responsibility as a couple instead of outsourcing it to an institution.
Yeah.
So there's like a lot of knowledge. There's learning and knowledge that goes into, I think, having, or not even learning, unlearning lots of things that were taught about birth as part of that process of going into a home birth or out of hospital birth confidently. And you kind of look at your partner at the end of the day before the birth and we are doing this together. This is our decision. And we're not outsourcing this responsibility. Bringing a child into the world is like a sacred moment, and we're making that decision together.
Even just your example of the rupture of membranes, you stepped out of the birth center and decided what you wanted. And the other alternative with the OB, like you said, was they would have just come in to tell you what
Mm-hmm.
needs to happen. In the hospital, they do feel like all the responsibility is theirs and there's this liability. Whereas even though with midwives, that is true in a sense, but they really want you to be the one to make the decision because nobody has the crystal ball to tell you how this will change your birth experience, and you deserve the right to make the choice.
Absolutely. Yeah.
You mentioned a little bit about, like, the resources when your wife was pregnant, you were still learning, and the things that, like, kinda helped you change your mind, business being born. Did you feel like there was a pivotal moment of something you learned that shifted that for you, or something about the safety or something about home birth or at a hospital birth that was the moment? Or was it more of a gradual awakening and unfolding? Or was there like a hard, okay, this is what we're doing?
It was definitely more gradual, but the number one thing that stands out to me is like just, wow, I didn't know this about birth. It was just the fact that it is a natural physiological event. And I know that sounds so simple, but I didn't know what a midwife was. I didn't know what a doula was before my wife got pregnant. I didn't even know what birth was. I thought I was like, I was just conditioned by Hollywood, right? It's like this terrible experience. You get run over by a truck or something, and
Hmm.
then you're at the hospital and then you leave with a baby, right? But just to understand, it is a natural physiological process, like governed by the limbic system. And like when a woman who's unconscious could give birth,
Right.
right? And it really is true when they say like trusting the body, trusting your body. And I think once you look at not only like the educational process and the care of and the differences when you're looking at midwives and OBs, but when you look about, okay, like when we compare other mammals and we look at how do other mammals give birth, and we look at how midwives support birth versus a hospital environment, it's very clearly like a home environment or an environment that simulates a home. It's working in alignment with nature's design and physiology. Like it's working in parallel with that, and it's supporting the process versus all the bright lights, checking at the front desk, being half naked in front of a bunch of strangers. Those are all things that like very actively like harm and disrupt the birth process.
Yeah. If you think about doing that to any other mammal, people would be like, out of your mind. Go give that gorilla an IV. Good
Yeah.
luck. Yeah. Was there something besides you mentioned your midwives that helped you feel really educated and prepared? But was there something that helped you feel confident and prepared going into that first birth?
I would say a lot of it was definitely the more I learned about birth, the more I understood and really trusted my wife's her safety. I trusted her ability to do it outside of a hospital environment. Yeah. And that, and then just trusting my wife, forget the information. Like my
Mhm.
wife was like, this is what I want to do. And
Yeah.
she was like strongly guided by her intuition that like she's not sick. She doesn't have an injury. She doesn't have a disease. And that is the definition of what hospitals are built to treat. She's, I don't have any of these things. Why would I go to a hospital? And it was a lot harder for me to take that as an answer, like when I didn't know anything about birth. But the more I learned about it, that answer just made a lot more sense to me. And it's like, we need to listen to her as her husband. I need to listen to her intuition and trust that like birth is so sacred and there is so much of it that is governed by a woman's intuition for how safe she feels and how undisturbed she is or isn't. Like intuition is something that you can't measure it in a scientific study, but it has a huge impact on everything we do in life, especially, I think, birthing.
I'm curious how this experience has shaped you as a father and also as a partner, because I feel like there's a different role that partners play at births outside of the hospital system, and you feel like you can be more involved and a part of it. And I'm curious how this has shifted your view of your wife or your dynamic in a partnership. And I feel like it does set you up on how you're going to parent this child.
Yeah, absolutely. So, really quickly, I'll give you the short version of our second. He was
Oh,
born
yeah.
in December. Midwives were in Virginia, Tree of Life Midwifery in Fredericksburg, Virginia, and they were amazing. My wife, she was 41 and 5, right? So 41 and 6 down to 41 and 5. We were talking to our son and when he was in the womb and we were like, listen, you just need to beat your brother by at least a day, please. And he did.
Was there
So
still
for
the same laws in Virginia?
no, so there
No.
was no stress involved. My
Right.
wife was like, you can cook, little man, do your thing. And so yeah, she was 41 and 5. And at that point, she was like still walking every day. She went on a 2-mile walk. She was at the 1-mile mark and she was like, I think this is happening right now. And she almost debated calling me, but then walked home. And then I see her come into the driveway and I can't remember why I wasn't with her, to be honest. But I look out the window and I see her in the driveway and she's crying and they're like tears of joy because she could just tell. And she was like, I know this is happening right now. It's called Midwives and the doula. And they come to the house and they set up shop real quietly in the guest bedroom. And my wife's on the ball, on the toilet, on the ball, back and forth a little bit. And then it was only about 4 hours, 3.5, 4 hours, and maybe 15 minutes of pushing. And our son was born. And it was a lot different. Nothing against going to the birth center. If you want to do that and you think that's right for you, by all means. But not leaving our house, that was like, it was really special. I don't think there really is really any way to describe it with words. It's just a blanket of peace over our home. And it felt like just the world had stopped and nothing else existed. It lasted for hours. And it was just a really special moment. But going back to your question and why I think that matters is I think when a woman gives birth in a way that she feels that she's fully in control of the situation, and obviously can happen at the hospital, it might be a lot more challenging. You're going to face a lot more obstacles, but when she has full autonomy and she doesn't feel rushed into anything and birth unfolds as God designed it or as nature designed it, depending on your belief system, there's a lot of confidence that comes out of that. And my wife, it's like, there's just a lot of power. And I see that in the way that she mothers. She doesn't feel the need to outsource mothering, right? We live in a world of experts. There's an expert for this and there's an expert for that, and the sleep training and the youth dietitian. And once again, going back to intuition, like she feels empowered and confident in the way that she's mothering her children. And watching her mother our children is the greatest gift of my life. I'm in awe of her every day. She's just strong. She's confident. And it's not to say that you're perfect if you have a home birth or something like that. We have plenty of challenges being parents, but it's like we talk through it and there's not this immediate default to outsource to somebody else, which I think it's like a small conditioning aspect that happens. It starts at birth where it like almost pre-plants the idea of you can't do this. You can't do this without a doctor. You need a doctor. Your body can't do it by itself. And so that's just potentially a domino effect of this idea of we need to go to the expert type of mentality.
Yeah. So special. I remember when my dad was at my birth, both my parents, I invited them to my birth. I had my water broken 6 hours later. I was holding my son. It was very fast for a first baby. But I remember my dad looking at my mom and saying, I could have done that for you. Of witnessing my husband and his support with me. And he was just like, I could have done those things for you. And I think there was a piece of him that realized how much more involved he could have been than kind of crammed in the hospital corner at our birth. You mentioned not knowing that much at all, except what Hollywood told you to believe. Is there anything that you feel like was a misconception, or if there was like a dad on the fence, what you would want him to know about birth?
Okay. Yeah. I'm going to take that as two-part. So part one is I personally think the biggest misconception is what is a midwife? If we're going to change, because this is the mentality is we're not going to have a doctor, what are we going to have?
Yeah.
People that haven't never thought about birth before, they haven't quite developed that idea of we can do it ourselves. We can trust this process. This is how nature designed it. That thinking is a little bit foreign still. So the biggest thing that I would tell a dad is like a midwife, you know, some, and maybe you can correct me, some don't like being called certain things, but I would consider a midwife for the purposes of birth as like a healthcare provider. They're like a medical provider in the sense that they are trained in neonatal resuscitation the same way a nurse in the labor and delivery room is trained in neonatal resuscitation. Like the most probable things for a child being born to like, you know, maybe need a little bit of help after they're born in transition, like a midwife is trained to do those things. They're trained in CPR. They're trained in neonatal resuscitation. And although it sounds simple for you, you're a midwife, but like for me, I was like, I thought midwives were just like, you know, they were going to roll out of their VW van or their Subaru and just be like, I'm here for the good vibes. Like I didn't know.
We joke, we're like, here's a piece of leather to bite on. That's all we bring.
Yeah. So I think that was really important for me. And the best way to learn about midwives is just go spend some time with them. And there's different types of midwives. And depending on what state you're in, we don't need to go down that rabbit hole. But you should be able to find midwives, Google, Facebook page, Facebook Instagram, just look for midwives near you, talk to several of them the same way, hopefully, you would talk to more than one OB. And I think that'll help a lot because I really didn't know midwives were trained in neonatal resuscitation. And just that fact is like, it's comforting for me.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like one misconception that some partners have is that their place would be taken. If she has a doula or if she has a midwife, does she need me? And I feel like the midwife and doula a lot of time is there more for the dad so that he can be there for his partner and trying to keep that little family bubble intact, but that the dad has the safety net of knowing he doesn't have to think of it all. Somebody could hand him the cold washcloth so that he can put it on her forehead. He doesn't have to think of all the things. Were there any examples or ways that you felt like your birth team in either scenario really showed up for you? Because a lot of times the focus is all on the mom, you think, but I feel like there are plenty of ways where teams can show up for dads.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think the biggest thing that stands out was with our second. He was born at home and he didn't take his first breath for a little bit. And I think one of our midwives could tell that kind of freaked me out because I was just like started praying while he was in transition, ready to take his first breath. It was maybe a minute, but it felt 5. And I just remember after we went to one of our newborn appointments and postpartum appointments, and she was just like really intentional about asking me about that moment and really wanted to hear my thoughts on it. And that really meant a lot because we obviously didn't talk about it the day he was born, but just like having that, especially as dads, we're not getting the same hormones and euphoric experience necessarily. Like we have a pretty good memory of what happened. And I don't want to say birth trauma for a dad, although it's like, it could definitely be a thing, but it's like, that was a moment that I was just really happy that she asked me about it and we just talked about it. And I would say that was the first thing that came to mind. Just almost a debrief on his birth and just like talking about it was really helpful. As far as like the actual birth itself, it was very much a team effort. There was times where I would say with our first, the whole team was more involved. With our second, and part of this was a combination of preference for my wife, of what she expected for the first one, how our oldest was going through the birth canal, the support that she thought she needed in that moment, it just being a very long labor. And with our second, she was very much undisturbed. Midwife's not in the room for most of it, actually. And I was with her. Our doula was with her for a little bit. I would go in and out. Our doula would go in and out. And it was very much, very undisturbed. She was alone for a good chunk of it. And I think that's what she wanted. And afterwards, I remember asking about her, like, do you remember Maddie rubbing your back? She was like, no, not really.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, those first babies, sometimes it can take a village. And it can feel like all hands on deck. And then they just pave the way for the second.
yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. But it sounds like what your midwife gave you was she respected your experience as well as your wife's experience, so that your experience of the birth mattered and to support you through that.
Yeah, it
With
really meant a lot. And my wife had obviously asked me a lot about it, but it was just like having that third party. She just really cared to ask. And that's what I needed in that moment. I was thinking about it a lot. And at the end of the day, that moment gave me a lot of empathy for birth and just this reverence for birth that I think if that didn't happen, just knowing my own personality, I probably would have been not as empathetic to people that didn't choose home birth. I know that sounds terrible to say, but I just know it's really easy to get tribal with stuff of like, we're the home birth people and, or we do things this way. It's just whether or not you want to admit it, like that's just human nature. We get attached to our ideas pretty easily. And the way that my son came into the world and he did take a little bit to have his first breath, like it just gave me a lot of empathy for any decision that people make. I would just encourage people to make that decision from a place of confidence and knowledge and not a place of fear.
Yeah. Yeah. I loved in the beginning where you were saying that you felt like it was a strong no, but you wanted to do your research on it because some dads can stop at that. And the moms, I feel really educated on this topic and he will do the research with me. So I think that's a really important piece for dads to know. Don't just have an opinion without being willing to do some research with her.
Yeah. And if I was going to encourage one thing to dads, it would just be like, just trust your wife or your partner. Trust in their intuition, especially if they have the smallest inkling of, I think I don't want to go to a hospital, or even if it's like, I think I want to have a doula. It could be something like that. This is the most important moment of her life in so many ways. It's the most important moment for that child's life. The way that they enter the world, I think that matters. For the mother giving birth, she is going to remember this moment for the rest of her life. Guaranteed. It's more important than a wedding. The moment that she will be thinking about on her deathbed is her children and the way that she brought them into the world. Is something that's going to affect her and change the way that she is for the rest of her life. And so it's not just one day. It's a day that's going to affect the way that she lives and experiences the rest of her life. And approaching how you support that. And I totally get it. Like some guys, they work 80-hour, 90-hour weeks. It's like the last thing. They can't even imagine thinking about one other thing. And everybody's in a different place and everybody has different capacity to like getting involved in the conversation about birth. I know there's a lot of guys out there doing the best they can to protect and provide for their families, but just approach birth knowing that it's not just one day. Have as much empathy to her and just understanding of her intuition for how she wants to birth your children. And if you have to do it blindly, I would rather somebody blindly support their wife than just saying, no, we're doing it this way, right?
Yeah.
I would encourage you to get involved as much as you can, but the resentment that will come out of just saying, no, you're not getting a doula, we're going to the hospital because that's what I think's best without doing much research, that is just fertile ground for resentment. And the exact opposite is true. Protecting her through trust. It's not, most guys don't typically think about it that way. It's like protecting his jujitsu or carrying a firearm to the grocery store and making sure your house is locked up good. But protecting her experience around birth is a lot more realistic way to protect your wife or your partner.
Going back to the labor, what did she need from you? For dads who are like, I'm going to be her main support person, probably, where we have midwife, maybe a doula, but how and how not to show up for her.
Yeah, that's a really good question. And obviously every woman's different. And also what you expect or what you think going into your first is going to be, at least my experience, very different for the second based off of what my wife like thought she would have wanted. There's a lot of mystery in the first one. You don't know what to expect necessarily. With our second, it was very much don't do anything, but the not doing anything is a very active process, if that makes sense. You're not cheerleading. And honestly, she never sat me down and had this conversation. It was just what I knew by knowing my wife, right?
Yeah. You got the memo.
I know my wife, and it was also like, I don't want to say you get better at attending a birth, right? And it was only number 2, but it was like I understood and I thought about what I did in the first one. And it was like I took those lessons and I thought about it and like just learning more about birth continuously, like preparing still. It was like, I think it would probably be better if I was maybe less of a cheerleader. I might have done a little bit too much cheerleading. Honey, you're doing great with the first one. But like I said, everyone was different. So the doing nothing is a very active process in that your presence, I believe, your presence from a place of confidence, if your wife knows that you are confident in her and you are confident in her ability to birth your children, that presence alone means a lot. And it really affects the energy in the room. If your presence is negative, you don't think that she can birth your children, and you don't
Or
think
even
that,
distracted, like being on your
yeah,
phone or something like that. Like
yeah,
not, we call it holding space. That actively doing nothing is just our keeping the safe container when we're present.
yeah, absolutely. And I think at least as a partner, as a husband, part of that is like the lead up to the birth, where the more involved you are in her educational journey or her preparation journey, then your presence, and not your words or your actions, but your presence has more of a positive impact the more involved you are.
Yeah. And you were saying maybe doing less cheerleading, but sometimes with the first birth, she doesn't know she can do it. She thinks
Yeah.
she can't. But with the second, you do know you can do it because you did it. But you have that on your back. I feel like first-time moms are their own animal because they theoretically know they can do it. They've heard others can do it, but they don't know until they've done it. And then once you
Mm-hmm.
have your first, then you're like, I've done this before. I know I can do this. And so maybe she needed less cheerleading because she had that on her back.
Yeah, absolutely. Honestly, this conversation, I just find it so important. Right now, it's the only thing I know to do is just like talk about birth. And I just think it's really important. And so it does get me excited. Like the whole fear piece, you alluded to it, but when my wife gave birth, both times actually, the first things out of her mouth was, I did it.
Mm.
And I think as a culture, that speaks a lot to the fear around birth for women, because my wife had already given birth. It was like she said it again. And as somebody who is confident in her body, in her ability to give birth, she still said that. And I think that honestly just speaks to the history of birth over the past 100 years, just planting a lot of doubt and really normalizing negative traumatic birth. It doesn't necessarily need to be like an episiotomy or an unnecessary, or not unnecessary, but undesired or unwanted, unplanned C-section to consider it traumatic. And so we've normalized that. C-section rate's 33% in America roughly right now. And we've really normalized women having traumatic births to the point where even a woman who chooses home birth and knows that she wants to have a home birth and believes in her body and believes in her ability and trusts her ability to give birth, she still has something in her where she said, I did it afterwards.
Yeah, it's like, are there other mammals who question their ability to give birth or feel shocked when they do give birth? Yeah, we
Yeah.
can. If there are people who are wanting to be in touch with you about your book or what you're doing in birth work, how can they connect with you?
Yeah, I think Instagram's the best place, at apogee.dad on Instagram. The name of the book I wrote is called Why Home Birth, and it's on Amazon. And yeah, the website's whyhomebirthbook.com. And yeah, just shoot me a message. I'd be happy to talk to literally anybody. I get messages from people from time to time, and it's like my favorite part, speaking up publicly about my beliefs around birth. Every once in a while, I'll get a dad to message me and maybe have a concern and something that I'm going to be able to share my experience or thoughts on. And it's my favorite part of talking about this stuff publicly, is just trying to help other dads and other families step alongside their partner and support their woman from a place of confidence.
Thank you for coming on.
Yeah, of course. Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks for listening to the Born Wild podcasts. Find us on Instagram or email bornwildpodcasts@gmail.com. If this episode supported you, please share it and leave a review on Apple Podcasts. It'll help more families find us. This podcast is for education and storytelling only and is not medical or individualized health advice. And as always, stay wild.